Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries podcast. It's been a little while since the team has been reunited, and we're talking about Haaland and Kane. They're both kind of similar, but also slightly varying situations. Harry Kane has hired a Spanish physio who flies once a month over to help him with his ankle injuries, and he's been working with this physio for about 3 years, and he says that he feels in a totally different place. Whereas Haaland has been asked by Pep and Man City, and they've decided that they want to dispatch a member of their medical staff to monitor the daily routine of Haaland whilst he's away with Norway. We'll start off with the Kane situation, though, because that's really interesting. But, passing it to you, Ben, kind of from your knowledge, is this a growing trend? Alan Saint-Maximin we see quite often, as you've mentioned there, he often goes to the south of France to see individuals. I mean, is this kind of something that we'll see more normally with players?
Yeah, certainly with those foreign players coming into the league. We've had discussions, I think it was back end of last season, and I was quite maybe taken aback to learn that. So we spoke to a high profile physio in the Premier League at the time, and he said around about 70% of the players that he worked with foreign nationals, they all had their own personal therapists, physios, medical advisors who they would prefer to go and see away from the club, should they, unfortunately have picked up an injury or a knock.
And I guess throwing it to you, Raj, because you're on the front line, you do this sort of work with your practice. So what would happen in this sort of situation? Does a player kind of contact you direct, or is it the club? I mean, who's arranging this sort of situation?
I mean, it really depends. A lot of times it's the agent as well. So a lot of the times the intermediary is the agent. Also depends on the type of relationship you have with the club and the club physios. So some of that might just depend on how long you've been working with the club and player for, right? Now, if the player makes it known that they, that they're going to do this like Kane has, then there's likely more coordination between whoever that physio is and the club physios. Because of course you want to come in and you want to know what they've been doing already, right? Because you're not there day to day. So that coordination is a critical part of the entire plan of care.
And I guess as well as a follow-up there, he's visiting Harry Kane once a month. But for me, I'm thinking only once a month. I mean, should he be there, every weekend or something after the football? I mean, realistically, Raj, how much work can you do with a patient in a short period of time, only once a month?
Isn't he there for about a week, though, every month?
He is, yeah.
Yeah, it's about a week per month. So there's likely key specific things that they're working on for that week when it comes to certain body preparation and training. And then I'm sure as he's only there for a week, but of course there's plenty of other ways to communicate right now, right? So he's likely just implementing those things for a check in during that week, progressing things, see how they're going, and doing his assessments. And then the rest of the time they're probably in communication. So although he's only there for a week, you can certainly get a good amount done in that week when it comes to assessment and then progression.
So throwing it back to you, Ben, I mean, I hope it's not a silly question, but what is it that this individual physio does that the Tottenham staff can't do? Or is that even a silly way to phrase it? It's not that they can't do it. It's maybe they don't have the resources. I don't know.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think I'm keen to stress the point that these individuals aren't working in isolation. This is very much a collaborative approach. Discussions will be ongoing. It's this holistic overview about, they're all working towards the same goal. One is ensuring that Harry Kane stays fit. And secondly, he's performing optimally. So those discussions, those consultations, they will be agreed and ongoing throughout this treatment plan. And, Harry Kane has been very open about, bringing in this physio with the club. It's another set of eyes. It's another perspective. And yeah, just like you said, it's an opportunity for Harry Kane to maybe access some support, guidance away from the club as well, away from that, maybe that clinical working environment. So as well as addressing, the injury issues or the problems with his ankle in the past, so the physical limitations, it's maybe just psychologically as well, having that opportunity just to do something in the comfort of his own home, in his own time, away from the club, and in a much more relaxed, like I say, environment where you can just focus on one thing. And yeah, you have that opportunity to build that rapport, you build that knowledge, because you have that, that intense period of time where you get to know the player a lot more. Whereas within that environment, elite club environment, it can be very time crunched.
Well, just to further the questions around that, Ben, you said that a lot of this stuff is done in the comfort of their own home, but does that also limit what this physio can do? I mean, the house of Harry Kane, I'm sure, is much more well equipped than mine or yours. He probably has a small gym, but he doesn't have the kind of medical equipment at hand that the Tottenham medical staff will have at their training ground, will they?
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about addressing and fixing a specific injury problem. What we're talking about is prevention and mitigating further risk. And, you're trying to ensure that Harry Kane is staying fit and available on the pitch. And to this point, everything that's been happening in and around Tottenham, whether it's, and the player himself, seems to be successful. He's performing, he's scoring goals, and ultimately he's staying fit.
Yeah, do you have anything to add to that, Raj? I feel like you wanted to get involved.
No, I was just agreeing with Ben, saying you don't really need that much equipment to do some of these things, right? Like you can have the basic equipment. If you're working on specific things, if you're trying to fill certain gaps, there's definitely ways to do that without needing a full medical or, robust gym setup. And that's likely what he's doing as well, right? What they're working on is very specific things. And prevention and performance are two sides of the same coin. So it's just working on different sides of the spectrum, on the same spectrum though. And so you don't really need that full setup. But I think to Ben's point, that comfort level and that rapport is critical, especially psychologically, because now you have someone that is focused solely on you. That's not to say Tottenham's aren't focused solely on him, but they're also responsible for X amount of players as well, right? And so, and many of them are going to be acute issues, which might take up more of your time for the physios. Whereas here you have that one-on-one time and that full focus with a different perspective, whatever it is that's spent for Harry with that physio during that week.
And I'm quite interested, for a lot of people, ankle injuries are quite a common thing. So what is the kind of preventative measures that they would be doing, even down to the Sunday warrior who likes to play football with his mates, but we all pick up all sorts of injuries and strains. What's the kind of thing that this physio would be working with Harry Kane specifically on?
I mean, the biggest thing is what we call proprioceptive awareness with the ankle, right? Which is kind of your body's awareness of where your body parts are in space. So when you have ankle injuries, some of those what we call proprioceptors can get damaged. So you lose that instant feedback. And that's why you have some of those ankle clusters. And so they'll be working a lot on that proprioception and challenging that balance in different ways. Pretty much getting him used to spontaneous movements and being able to react quicker to them instantaneously.
And would you say there's a top exercise for this? If somebody's listening and I think they want to bring a bit of this physio back into their home?
I mean, honestly, I would start with the big thing to start with is balance. That's going to be the baseline. I hate recommending stuff because I can't really say anything, responsibly without actually seeing the person. But for proprioception, you probably want to start with being able to complete some single leg balance, without falling over. So,
all right. Well, let's bring it on to the Haaland situation then. This one is club led, Pep led. We all know how much he kind of loves to control his players. We've discussed previously, Ben, about maybe the Sane situation and when Sane didn't want to follow Pep's guidance and went with his own medical situation. But kind of addressing this, is this always the concern when players go off on international duty? I'm always interested to know, how do they marry up the medical kind of timeline between club and country?
Yeah, it's obviously, it's very difficult. and national team and clubs. And we've seen lots of instances in the past where, domestically players will go and join their national teams. And even just during this international break, Isaac being one, picking up injuries in training, muscular problems, soft tissue issues. It's difficult. So, by taking a club representative, a member of the medical team who's able to have that inside line and that knowledge of the player from a daily basis, they can help manage that player in terms of managing their load pre-match, ensuring they have an appropriate, recovery plan. Historically, we spoke about players like Daniel Sturridge when he went away with England. Instead of having that 24-hour sort of post-match recovery strategy in place, they maybe extend that with his own physios to maybe 48 hours because, those players are at increased risk of suffering injuries. So these are the players, that they have a better understanding on and how they're managed on a daily basis. And again, we spoke about with Harry Kane, everybody's working to the same goal here because ultimately, in Manchester City and Erling Haaland, you have a player who is, appears to be at the top of his game at the moment. And if he's playing well domestically and he's fit and he's playing, that's going to transition over to that national team. And it's Norway that's going to reap the rewards for that.
So is this involvement from an individual from Man City, is it because there's an inability to kind of quickly communicate injury needs? As we've said there, even at club level, physios are managing lots of teams, lots of players, whether that be, the youth teams as well. Or will national team coaches be privy to some of this medical information from clubs, Ben?
Yeah, there's a massive amount of information exchange between club and country, and that will be an ongoing. And of course, Erling Haaland, being the high-profile, high-status player that he is, and of course his well-documented injury problems from Borussia Dortmund, the national team boss will be well aware of all of the issues, and they've seen how Haaland has moved across to England, how Manchester City have been managing him, and they'll be keen for that, to continue and keep him fit, and of course keep on scoring goals.
I mean, with this fast-paced environment, Raj, is it difficult to keep up though? When a player kind of comes over, how quickly do these briefings happen?
It's all relatively fast moving, and even the best communication is not going to give you the full amount of information compared to someone who's been there day to day with that player, right? A lot of those soft variables are very hard to communicate. And so that's why continuity of care is so important. And that's why Man City is having someone with him the entire time, like someone who's been there with him through the preseason where they were managing, people were like, how come he's not playing, right? So they've been extremely methodical and careful with that continuity of care and that methodical management of his load, especially for a player who's new to the Premier League, right? So it makes sense on every level to me with how they're doing it because of like what you said, it's extremely fast moving and it just becomes difficult to communicate everything. And some things are just difficult to communicate.
So I guess a final question to both of you is, in the future, will we see maybe solo physios for every player, every club? Is this where we're going to end up in a few years' time, that each and every player will have their own person there just to manage and keep an eye on them? I mean, are we going to see, mega backroom medical staffs?
In the ideal world, an ideal situation, then maybe yes, but the reality, no. It's a numbers game. This is a business. For me, I've always championed the cause of the backroom staff of the medical teams. I always seen as being heavily under-resourced. They're working sometimes with massive numbers. These are commodities now, players that command vast sums of money. And to me, it seems absurd that you may only employ a small team in that backroom staff to manage, first team, 21s, youth team. And I always feel that there could always be more. And, we heard from Phil Hayward when he was his time from head of medicine at Wolves, where, as they went up the leagues and resources and budgets grew bigger, their backroom staff grew from, I think it was a team of 5 at one point to over 30 when he left. So this is something which is definitely getting better. I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, but I don't think we'll ever see a situation where, we have a single player assigned with his own, in effect, medical team to manage his daily needs.
I mean, what is the comparable situation like in America? Are players, is it down to their own discretion then? Are players kind of embracing this individual kind of style, or is it club-led? I don't know. What's the insight from across the pond?
Really, in the US, you do see a similar movement, but not to the extent. Typically, when you're with the team, you have that team's physio medical staff. Now, if the club or the team wants to hire your personal physio, right, as part of the team consultancy, some official capacity, then you'll see it. But during the season, typically you're under the full care of whoever the team is. The interesting part becomes during the off season in the summertime. That's when you see a lot of these players in the US who are now using their own physios and things of that nature. And so that can create some of those interesting transition points, right? When you're coming back to a season, to a training camp. I think it makes it a little tougher for those team physios, because now, unless you're obviously in, clear communication with the summer, whoever was treating them or working with them in the summer, because then you're not really sure what they've been doing over the summer. Likely you're just asking the player, or so there's kind of that disjoint. It's a little bit more disjointed in the US, unless you just hire that personal physio for that player. And you'll see that kind of what we've seen in Europe. It's more for the higher profile players, or those who are willing to spend it, is where you'll see that. You don't see it for every single player.
That brings me on to another point that I was going to ask about. Is this going to be clubs maybe in the future then managing their key players, or their, I don't want to say favourites, but the most valuable assets of the team? Because for me, looking at Manchester City, maybe it's a different mentality from this season to last season, but why wasn't Grealish kind of given this same special treatment? Grealish, as we well know, has a similarly kind of jaded injury history. So why was Haaland kind of given this special precedent? I don't know who wants to take that one, maybe Ben.
Yeah, look, I think it's very difficult to know discussions behind closed doors. You have to address the individual, address the specific nature of their injury history, and also let's not forget, Jack Grealish is a seasoned Premier League player of sorts. Erling Haaland was coming in from still young, well-documented injury, but coming in from the Bundesliga, so still developing. So there were other issues in and around that. Also, you can maybe factor that, the emphasis really is of the importance, if Manchester City, really want to push on in the Champions League. They say they need Erling Haaland fully fit. If Jack Grealish picks up an injury, is it a blow? Yes, it is. But, you've got the likes of De Bruyne, Bernardo, Gundogan, Rodri, Calvin Phillips when fit, Mahrez, Foden, the list is endless. So there's a little bit more flexibility within that City squad. But like I say, for an out-and-out top-class striker and what Haaland is, then like I say, he could be the difference between City, like I say, maybe reaching the quarter and the semi-finals, or actually going on to lift that trophy.
So that is the end of this week's Premier Injuries podcast. We try and do this every week of the season just to keep you up to date and give you a more in-depth insight to the goings-ons around the Premier League and injuries in clubs. But for now, I'm going to wish you the best of luck. We will see you again very, very soon, and we wish you health and happiness in the week ahead.